2024 Florida Gators college football preview, plus starting quarterback news and other notes from across the country on Good Morning College Football. Hello and welcome to episode 84 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. On the road again this week, so not the most ideal recording setup, I'll be honest, dealing with some Wi-Fi issues, some low speed. So hopefully everything comes together and runs relatively smoothly during today's show. We'll do the best that we can. But hey, we're 3 days until the college football season kicks off with week 0, 4 games, 2 featuring FBS versus FBS matchups, 2 others, FBS versus FCS matchups, a couple of FCS only games as well. So a little bit of an appetizer to the college football season itself ahead of a packed week 1 that stretches from Thursday to Monday. And with that, coming up as soon as it is, we are getting some confirmation on starting quarterbacks at several programs across the country. We're seeing our first official team depth charts for those week 0 teams, and some updates have already been made, in reference to those, some changes here or there in our CFB Winning Edge team profiles, which we will use today in our Florida preview, our final team preview of the preseason. And on that note, if you like what you see with our team profiles, our returning production database, also our stat projections from CFB Winning Edge, which use a 3-year weighted average of the team's history in various statistical categories, the head coach and offensive play caller, defensive play caller as well. But as a fantasy football, college fantasy football company, those of you who are tuned in to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel probably more interested in those offensive numbers. But those are all available to our C2C Winning Edge and All 22 tier members. Also, those week 0 stat projections, player stat projections, are now available in the Campus to Canton Discord, C2C Winning Edge tier channels, and our week 0 previews, our game previews with projected point spreads for our team strength power ratings, our talent edge power ratings, which look to isolate only the talent numbers for each program, and then our prism ratings, which are kind of the opposite of those talent edge ratings, look only at stats to give a projected scoring margin, of those things that we talk about when we're discussing team performance. So all of that is available to C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier members in the Campus to Canton Discord, but we will also discuss some of those numbers on a Friday show as well in our full week 0 preview. But if you haven't already, we very much would appreciate you giving this video a like, subscribing to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. And also, if you're not quite ready to commit to the C2C Winning Edge or all 22 tier level, you can also get a little bit of an appetizer for what Campus to Canton has to offer with a membership for as little as $2.99 per month, which includes access to a ton of written content, tools on the site, stats, all sorts of data, and Discord access. Might not get every channel available. We do have some that are reserved for our different membership tiers as you move up the ladder, but that $2.99 per month gets you access to a ton of stuff: best ball rankings, CFF rankings, waiver wire discussion, and things of that nature. So definitely do suggest, if you haven't already, or we really do appreciate if you've decided to become a member at CampusToCanton.com. So let's get through a little bit of fall camp news here. The biggest things: a few injuries going on that are going to impact some teams, including Rutgers. There's been a bit of a buzzy team so far this fall. Expected to be very competitive in a new look Big Ten. However, unfortunately, maybe the best player on the roster, quite honestly, certainly the highest rated defensive player in our video game ratings at CFP Winning Edge, our team strength overall player ratings. Linebacker Mohamed Toure will miss the 2024 season with a torn ACL. Head coach Greg Schiano announced on Thursday. Toure is a 97 rated player. So if you think of our video game ratings, they're influenced by the EA Sports video games of the past. They differ a little bit over the years. We've made some adjustments. So, players can go over a 99 overall rating. But Toure still at a 97 is certainly one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten, and a player that will be severely missed for the Scarlet Knights this season. He also missed the 2022 season with an ACL tear. So Toure hopefully be working his way back and get back to his football future moving forward, because certainly I'm no NFL draft expert, but it seems like his level of production and how well he has played at Rutgers when healthy seems like he's a future pro, most likely. Georgia Tech also will be without its projected starting tight end this season, Brett Seether. According to Brett Key on Tuesday, Seether is going to miss the 2024 season due to a knee injury as well. And a little bit of a surprise in the Georgia Tech projected depth chart to me. Perhaps I had just missed it, but Avery Boyd, who was listed as a wide receiver on the official roster, 6'2", 232 pounds. He's played in 24 games in his career, a couple of starts. He was actually listed as the number 1 tight end. So Georgia Tech is, has, I think, one of the maybe more underrated wide receiver groups in the ACC, maybe in college football. Should be an exciting offense to watch this season. This Saturday in Dublin against Florida State, we'll get to see it. But Haynes King at quarterback and Jamal Haynes returning as the starting running back. Running back group is in pretty good shape as well. But with Eric Singleton, Malik Rutherford, Chase Lane, and we had Avery Boyd slotted in as a second-team wide receiver, but he is listed officially as the starting tight end. Jackson Hawes, a transfer, listed as the number 2 tight end now with Seether unavailable. Hawes is a transfer coming in from Yale. Also, a couple of other transfers might be in the mix for playing time in addition. But Georgia Tech, without its, until yesterday, who we had projected as our starting tight end for the Yellow Jackets, but perhaps moving in athletic pass catching direction, and curious to see how Avery Boyd steps up and turns into perhaps another quality pass catching option in that starting lineup for Haynes King. Elsewhere, there was also injury news at North Texas. Ole Miss transfer defensive back Isheem Young will miss the 2024 season due to a knee injury as well. So hate it that we hear this sort of thing often. Football is certainly a type of sport where injuries are very, very common, and this sort of thing happens more often than we would like. But some significant losses. I mean, Young was expected to be a starter in the secondary for the Mean Green, one of the highest rated players on that defensive unit, and a team that should also be pretty interesting, highly competitive in the American, trying to get back to a bowl game with Chandler Morris as the official starting quarterback now. And on that note, Morris was one of several quarterbacks who were named officially the starter for week 1 or week 0 in the case of Nevada. Right after we recorded on Monday, it was confirmed, some news that we had discussed briefly previously in some Nevada notes in earlier episodes. But Brendan Lewis is expected to, or was expected to be the starting quarterback. He will, in fact, lead the Wolfpack in week 1 against SMU. Lewis began his college career at Colorado. Has been a 13-game starter overall. Played 70% of snaps last season for the Wolfpack. So not completely unexpected there, but the competition, and seemingly to me, his top competition for that role, Chuba Purdy, the transfer from Nebraska, really just it never got off the ground because Purdy has been dealing with a shoulder injury that is expected to cost him a fair amount of time early this year. AJ Bianco is also in the mix for this starting job, as was a junior college transfer, Anthony Grigsby Jr. But Lewis, who brings perhaps his best skill is as a runner, but he'll pair with a rebuilt Nevada offense, has 3 transfer wide receivers projected as, or not even projected, officially listed now because we have a depth chart as starters, a transfer starting at tight end as well. So a new look offense there, a lot of incoming players at running back. They moved one of their more impactful or based on fall reports we discussed a little bit, Ashton Hayes as a running back, somebody who was making a lot of plays in fall practice. He's actually listed as a wide receiver on the 2 deep, so curious to see what his role will be. We'll get a chance to look at that on Saturday. But Brendan Lewis officially named the starter for the Wolfpack on Monday. Baylor has tabbed Daquan Finn, the transfer from Toledo, All-MAC quarterback. He beat out Sawyer Robertson for the starting QB job for the Bears. Mostly that was expected. Could have been a fairly close battle, and during the spring we were hearing more about those two splitting the reps somewhat evenly, but Finn was expected by most to emerge as a starter, and that has been made official now. At Duke, Malik Murphy, also highly favored to be the starting quarterback for the Blue Devils, the Texas transfer. He is, in fact, going to be that top QB for Manny Diaz at the start of the season. At South Carolina, Lenore Sellers got the first snap of spring. That was big news when we first heard it. Got the first snap in fall camp and just never relinquished that top spot on the depth chart. He is going to be the starter for South Carolina. There's been a lot of discussion. We've done it here. I know it's been a hot topic in our CFF Slack at Campus to Canton and elsewhere. Washington State, the quarterback situation there, and a lot of that has to do with these underdog best balls, and John Mateer has been someone our team has targeted a lot, taken a little bit of a risk there because it seemed like a very even battle competition with Zevi Eckhouse, the transfer from Bryant, but Mateer was named the starter for the Cougs to begin this season earlier this week. So good news there if he's able to carry that into the season and what we expect to be a very productive Washington State offense. Cam Ward, of course, put up really good numbers for the Cougs. Mateer, a little more of a productive runner is where his experience lies so far in his college career. Hoping, of course, to improve as a passer and show that he's going to be productive through the air as well. We've had a lot of discussion on the Washington State wide receiver room in fall camp so far, but Mateer getting the nod and didn't sound like there was maybe much separation between he and Zevi Eckhouse. So wouldn't be surprised if Mateer struggles a little bit if we do see Eckhouse, but it's much harder to lose a job if you are that week 1 starter. So Mateer gets the nod, at least early on. Georgia Southern, a little more surprising. J.C. French is going to be the top quarterback for the Eagles, who will take on Boise State in week 1. Dexter Williams II had been our projected starter, mainly just because coming out of spring, it sounded like he was getting maybe just by the slightest bit the most snaps. And just some of the coverage, as we discussed at the time, seemed to indicate that Williams maybe had a very, very slight lead over French and David Dallas. In the last week or so, there was a real sort of buzz starting to build that Dallas might be the guy who ends up winning this job. So French getting the nod officially came as a surprise. And I know there were some Georgia Southern team sites that were surprised based on how they saw the scrimmages play out, how the reps were divided up between these three quarterbacks. There was a scrimmage on Saturday where quarterbacks had some good moments and some not so good moments, all three of them. But the news coming that J.C. French, I mean, it looked like at the beginning of the season, the former Memphis transfer who's been there in the system for a couple of years now, coming into the season, it seemed like he maybe had the inside track. But once spring practice kicked off and a lot of the rumblings we heard coming out of fall camp, he seemed like maybe the third quarterback on the list. But he is going to get that week one start against Boise State in another, like Washington State, and there are some connections there, another offense that should be pretty productive for the quarterback and passing production, certainly. And FAU, Cam Fancher, the transfer from Marshall, as expected, is going to get that week one start for the Owls. So lots of those quarterback battles mostly turned out as expected. Couple of surprises. We'll keep our eyes out for other news, other surprises as well. We'll pass those along on Friday if things happen over the next 48 hours or so before we get to that week 0 preview. But with that out of the way, let's discuss the number 34 team in our CFB Winning Edge team strength power ratings, the Florida Gators. And I was a little surprised, actually, that it's not that we're on the low end for Florida as far as projections go. I mean, all the sources that we've referenced throughout this preview series, we've discussed Stuart Mandel at The Athletic. We've discussed Athlon Sports. We've mentioned, the Sporting News, Mark Schlabach at ESPN, Andy Staples at On3, all of those media members who are, of course, very plugged in, pay a ton of attention to this, and use the added context and insight to analyze how these teams are likely to finish. None of those media members had Florida in a post-spring or their most recent top 25, and understandably. And I guess I was just operating under the assumption that even though the computer-based projection systems like ours, but different in a lot of ways, thought that maybe they would be in the same range as us, low 30s. But maybe even a little lower, because this Florida team struggled last season. The talent numbers, they're still comparable, much better than FBS average in a lot of ways, but taking a little bit of a downturn over the last decade, certainly from when Florida was consistently one of the top recruiting powers in college football and just churned out future NFL players. It's a little different now if we look at the 247 composite ratings and On3 and Rivals that we track in our CFB Winning Edge team profiles. Nevertheless, this is a talented team, a competitive team, and the numbers certainly show that. Other projection systems are a bit higher on Florida than we are. ESPN's Football Power Index has the Gators number 20 nationally. Beta Rank has Florida at 21. The K-Ford ratings have the Gators 22nd, and ESPN's and Bill Connolly's SP Plus have the Gators at number 23. So all fairly significantly higher than our player-based projections, where we build those individual player ratings, add them up, put them into our roster strength ratings based on those position and unit ratings, and then build those up, compare or put them into the calculation with the team performance ratings, the head coach ratings, which are head coach specific team performance ratings, and then gives us our overall player rating, overall team strength rating. And we're at number 34. And as we discussed, a few episodes ago, part of that was some injury news coming out of fall camp that had a little bit of a hit to the Florida running back room. But even then, we were already on the low side at number 31, I think it was, before the Montrell Johnson change, where sounds like good news. He's potentially going to be available for that week 1 showdown with Miami, but we still removed him from our depth chart projections just for now. We'll see how that news shakes out over the next week or so. But I was a little surprised, like I said, that our numbers were lower on Florida than others. But one reason maybe for a little bit of optimism is the quarterback position, Graham Mertz, in his second season with head coach Billy Napier, and reconnecting with Chimere Dike, who was one of his top targets at Wisconsin earlier on. The addition of Elijah Badger at wide receiver, transfer from Arizona State in the spring, and then of course Eugene Wilson III, Trey Wilson, who has a very bright future, big time playmaker potential. That wide receiver core should be a real strength. And Graham Mertz, I'm personally fairly optimistic that even though he had a good year 1 for Florida after transferring from Wisconsin, there's the potential for him to be even better in year 2. But David Hale of ESPN.com, who's been an MVP of this preview series, certainly giving quarterback tiers for all 134 FBS teams, and a stat or a blurb about each expected starter. And he mentioned when discussing Mertz here, SEC quarterbacks that completed 70% of their throws, have 20 pass touchdowns, and no more than 6 turnovers in a season over the last 20 years. Jaden Daniels at LSU last season, Alabama's Mac Jones and Talia Tagovailoa, and Mertz. So pretty exclusive company there. And Mertz was quite good, statistically speaking, last year, and maybe a little shaky to the trained eye at times, but the numbers overall were quite good. Unfortunately, had an injury at the end of the season, wasn't able to finish strong, but back and healthy and with an improved receiving core around him, I think that Mertz is set up for a decent season this year. So on that note, let's take a look at how last season turned out for the Gators before we turn our attention to this upcoming year. But Florida, 34 in our power rankings nationally, but that is 12th in the SEC. And the big topic of discussion is, of course, the toughest schedule in college football. But last season, 5-7 overall, 3-5 in the SEC East. They were 55th in team performance, our grade for how well, as it describes, that team performed on the field. We're talking, statistically speaking, only there. 41st in offensive team performance, the disappointing unit, and that's been rare for Florida, seemingly for most of my lifetime, is the defensive side of the ball. Slid to 80th in defensive team performance, 110th against the pass, 90th against the run, and some ugly numbers if we dig into the details here on the defensive side of the ball. Scoring defense, points per game allowed against FBS opponents in the regular season. Florida ranked 89th nationally. Yards per play allowed in those same games, 122nd. Also, yards per pass attempt, 126. So giving up way too many big plays through the air. Points per drive, according to Brian Fremeau, which is also FBS opponents only with garbage time filtered out. Florida ranked 98th defensively last season. One positive area, 28th in success rate against, but EPA per play, 106th. That EPA per play equivalent that we use is from collegefootballdata.com. The offensive numbers, better across the board, nearly 61st in scoring offense, 48th in yards per play, 56th in points per drive, 43rd yards per pass attempt, 48th in success rate, and 39th in EPA per play. So on net, or on the margin in these categories, scoring margin below 0, 76th overall. Gators outscored, understandably, with a team that ended up with a losing record, but outscored in FBS games in the regular season, which of course Florida only played regular season games last season, unfortunately, if you're a Gators fan, but also below 0 in net yards per play, 92nd nationally. Real area of improvement for this Florida team this year, you would hope. Points per drive, also below 0, 76th nationally, 82nd in net yards per pass attempt. Net success rate, much better, 29th nationally, and EPA margin, also a bit better, but roughly FBS average, 68th nationally. How did it work out as far as the schedule goes? If you compare the one-loss record, 5-7, of course, and losing those final 5 games, Florida, it was a disappointment. Started relatively well, 3-1 after that Utah loss, 5-2 before the bye week after getting victories over Vanderbilt and South Carolina. You can see the post-game win expectancy numbers mostly went according to plan there. A bit fortunate, the Gators, in that South Carolina victory had just a 14% chance of winning, according to collegefootballdata.com. And if you were to replay that game with the same box score 100 times, 1,000 times, Florida's probably going to lose that game a lot more often than it did. But after that victory, things did not go well. 3 losses where Florida was, pretty much outplayed by a large margin, statistically speaking. Even that overtime loss against Arkansas, the box score indicated that Florida had just an 8% chance of winning that game. Much closer the last 2 weeks, and Florida had opportunities to upset Missouri and Florida State. Statistically speaking, actually outplayed both the Gators and the Seminoles. 82% in that loss to Missouri, 88% in the loss to Florida State, where it was significantly limited at the quarterback position. Florida was, of course, playing without Mertz as well. But those 2 games could have been Florida victories. And as a result, we add up all these post-game win expectancy numbers. And this Florida team could have been, maybe should have been, a 6-win team. Nevertheless, didn't get it done where it matters the most in the final score, and came up short of 500, came up short in that in-state rivalry game against Florida State. But if you're trying to look on the bright side, think optimistically, you say, okay, this Florida team was a little bit better than its record would indicate. This season, with Florida coming in, and we're going to now share our returning production database. Florida brings back a lot of its core pieces from that team. 22nd nationally in returning production. This is adjusted for incoming transfers. If we were just looking at raw data, who's coming back, who's not from last season, Florida would rank 20th in returning production. In that scenario, they would have ranked 26th in offensive returning production, 32nd on defense. But when we adjust for incoming transfers, those numbers change a little bit. Florida 34th in offensive returning production, 29th in defensive returning production. Mertz is a big part of it. Came up a little bit short of 3,000 passing yards, but as David Hale pointed out, That completion percentage, very, very high, 72.8%. Not necessarily the most aggressive as far as attacking down the field, just 6.7 average depth, 6.7 yards and average depth of target, but took care of the football really well. 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and 8.1 yards per pass attempt. There's certainly some room for improvement there, but not terrible by most measures. The running back room and rushing production, losing Trevor Etienne definitely stung, and seeing him transfer to Florida even more, or transfer to Georgia, I should say, even more so. But Montrell Johnson Jr. back, unfortunately, not fully healthy due to an injury suffered in early fall camp. But Trayon Webb, the other running back with over 100 yards, couple of touchdowns on 26 carries last season. And we're hearing some positive spring buzz about Jacoby Jackson. There's some thought that he might actually emerge as the top running back if Johnson's not able to go week 1, or if he's limited. So we still have Trayon Webb, as we'll get to, as our projected starter, but Jackson could end up taking on that role. But hopefully, again, if you're a Florida fan, Johnson will be back and available, and if so, should be in line for a pretty heavy workload with Etienne moving on, and those two having shared that workload for the vast majority of last season. You think that Johnson's going to be in a position to capitalize with Etienne not being available. Ricky Pearsall, moving on to his pro career. He'll be missed, was targeted 88 times, 54 catches, 970 yards, and 4 touchdowns. But the addition of Elijah Badger covers up a lot of that. Another Arizona State transfer, but Badger targeted nearly 100 times. It didn't quite work out, didn't lead to huge numbers for the Sun Devils, but still 65 catches, 713 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Eugene Wilson, who was the target for a lot of those short throws, just 2.8 yards average depth of target. Hopefully he'll be used a little bit more downfield this season, but understand wanting to get him the football as quickly as possible and see what he can do with it. 6 touchdowns, led the Gators last season, 61 catches, just behind Pearsall on the team leaderboard. But hopefully he'll be able to turn that into, or if he's targeted a similar amount, catches a similar amount, hopefully we'll see a little bit more in the yardage total than the 538 he had last year. Chimere Dike was limited, but the Wisconsin transfer has a strong connection with Mertz, and last year in limited action and fairly limited production, when he did get his hands on the football, could create big plays, 17.3 yards per catch. Tight end Arlis Boardingham, maybe flying a little bit under the radar at the tight end position, but can be a productive pass catcher. Montrell Johnson can catch the ball out of the backfield as well, had 30 receptions last season on 41 targets. The offensive line, losing 2 full-time starters to transfer isn't usually a good thing. Richie Leonard IV is going to be starting for Florida State this season, most likely. Micah Mezcua moving on as well. The rest of the offensive line, there was a bit of shuffling. There was some players unavailable for chunks of last season. Bringing in 2 players with starting experience is potentially key. Devin Manuel, Brendan Crenshaw coming in as well. Crenshaw Dixon, excuse me. Florida, hopefully a little bit more consistency on the offensive line in 2024. Defensively, top 2 tacklers return. Jordan Castell at safety, Shamir James at linebacker, bringing in DJ Douglas, who was productive through the transfer portal. But defense hit a little bit harder by players leaving via transfer, at least as terms of experienced players, at the high end. Scooby Williams, Jaden Hill, Princely moving on as well, Miguel Mitchell. So that hurts a bit, but with that Florida defense being, the weaker of the 2 units, statistically speaking, you could maybe make an argument that perhaps Florida could benefit from maybe some addition by subtraction in some ways. Getting back to our team profiles here, as I mentioned, the raw talent available for the Gators still ranks, quite well. 23rd in average 247 composite rating among offensive players, top 10 nationally, number 8 among defensive players, 16th in those average 247 composite ratings across the entire roster. That's similar with the other recruiting sites as well. 19th in average rivals rating, 15th in average on 3 rating. But when we adjust for experience and production, we do see a little bit of a step in the wrong direction as far as the rankings go for the Gators. 30th in roster strength, 40th in offensive roster strength, and 22nd on the defensive side of the ball. But this, Gators starting lineup, again, quarterback position, if Graham Mertz is able to play as well as he did last year, statistically speaking, maybe even a little bit better, then this has the potential, I think, to be a very, very solid offense. If Montrell Johnson, is back and available for the majority of the season, even if not week 1, then this unit will be even better. The offensive line did rank 74th in our O-line performance ratings last season, so that needs to improve, and the level of experience is lacking just a bit with only 3 full-time starters back, but nevertheless, still have personally fairly optimistic expectations for Florida offensively and defensively. Similar to some other teams that we've discussed in the past, LSU falls in this category to even a more extreme degree because that LSU defense was one of the worst in the country last season, but also a top 10 unit as far as most of the talent ratings go and roster strength. Florida, as you can see, there's still some players highlighted with injury concerns. Justice Boone, Shamar James, think they're both going to be back in full speed. We just haven't removed those designations yet. But injuries were a bit of an issue at the end of last season. There have been some bumps and bruises in spring and in fall camp as well. Kamani McLean dealing with an eye injury and not sure that, according to some of the beat reporters, the former 5-star and Colorado transfer, not really expected to contribute much this season. He's actually walking on at Florida, as you may know. Nevertheless, there's talent on hand, and he's certainly part of that. But if the defensive line, that is an experienced center for this Florida defense, plays well, then this team is going to be dangerous in the SEC. They were 70th in defensive line performance last season, getting Boone back as an edge defender, adding George Gums and Joey Slackman, the transfer from Penn. That's going to help as well. And anybody who pays close attention to the SEC knows the defensive line is key pretty much across the board. But 2 full-time starters return in the secondary, Jason Marshall Jr., Jordan Castile. We're projecting a couple of transfers coming in to join them as starters. But getting down to the most important piece of it, how does this schedule play out? It is the toughest in college football. Number 1 in our strength of schedule ratings. Number 1, just about every other strength of schedule measure that I've seen. The win total projection posted by DraftKings is 4.5, which seems incredibly low for a team that, some of the smartest projection models in the country have as a top 25 team. But Florida is going to be at a disadvantage far more often than not in terms of talent, experience, production, all of that when they're facing this difficult level of schedule. Miami is certainly vulnerable, not a team that always takes care of games where they are projected as the favorite, but we do have the Hurricanes, even in the swamp, favored in week 1. If Florida is able to pull off an upset there, that would be potentially a game changer for the Gators this season for Billy Napier and his hot seat status. But that is about as big of a week one matchup as we will get from a just overall, how is it going to shape the season potential. One of Florida's next, the SEC opener against Texas A&M, they have a pretty big week one matchup as well. There's some others out there, but that Florida-Miami matchup is could say close to a must win for both sides there. But Florida should get a fairly easy win against Samford in week 2, but then getting into SEC play with Texas A&M, that's going to be tough, even though, again, that game is at the Swamp. So Florida does have an opportunity, does have winnable games against quality opponents in the first 3 weeks by getting those opponents, hosting those games at Florida Field, Miami and Texas A&M, though Florida's an underdog in both of those matchups by less than a touchdown, and definitely a winnable game. Those upsets would not be absolute shockers if Florida's able to go 2-1 or maybe even 3-0 in those first 3 games. Getting Mississippi State in Starkville, that's definitely a tougher draw. But early in the season, probably when you want to get this Mississippi State team. UCF, we've discussed, our numbers are higher on UCF than probably anybody else out there. But as far as that Miami game goes and how that will play into Billy Napier's future and Florida's season as a whole, that UCF game might be even more important. That is a game that Florida just cannot lose, I think, for the perception of this program in the state of Florida and the history there. Tennessee, always a matchup where it could go either way. The Gators traveling to Knoxville, going to be difficult. We do have Tennessee as a slight favorite. Also have Kentucky as a slight favorite. Our numbers like the Wildcats this season, but both of those games, once again, all 3 of those games are very winnable. They are within striking distance for Florida, even though we do have the Gators as a projected underdog in all 3. Get that extra week off as usual to prepare for Georgia, number 1 team in the country as far as the pollsters go. Coaches poll, AP top 25, number 2 in our projection. So understandably, expectations fairly modest there. We have the Bulldogs favored by 2 touchdowns. And that's just the start of maybe the most brutal stretch that any team will face in college football. Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State to finish. We've got the Gators as double-digit underdogs in 4 of those 5. The game against LSU at home and also get Ole Miss at home, create some opportunities for an upset. But man, this schedule, it is about as brutal as any that I remember since we started this in 2018, CFB Winning Edge, and maybe even prior to that. There are no easy FBS opponents. Even Samford at the FCS level, we've seen be competitive in games against tougher competition. So Florida, we do have projected to go over that 4.5 win total. The market and the odds makers seem to expect 5 wins at this point. The odds this morning at DraftKings were -155 on the over for Florida to get that 5th win. But can they get to 6? And would that be enough to save Billy Napier's job? I think it's definitely possible, especially if this team stays relatively healthy. We talked about the wide receiver core. We talked about the offensive weapons, the optimism around Mertz. And I think, the expectation that Florida is going to be a bit better defensively. I do think that this Florida Gators team is going to scare a lot of, I don't think they're going to get blown out in those 5 games in late October and in November, that final 5 weeks. I think that this team is going to be highly competitive, might even pull off an upset or 2 along the way. And if so, they will have earned that bowl game opportunity if they're able to get that 6th win, because no team in college football faces a tougher schedule according to our ratings, and I think according to most, just perusing through all the schedules, you would certainly, this one sticks out as maybe the toughest out there. So that's going to do it for us today for our 34th team preview. I think it's going to be our last one. We might, depending on how next week shakes out, maybe we'll be able to squeeze in a West Virginia preview, but I'm expecting for the most part, we're going to be talking news. We're going to be talking, previews and our projections for week 1. But on Friday, we are going to have that week 0 preview. We'll pass along any other news we get as far as injuries, starting quarterbacks, anything else you need to know then. But for now, if you haven't already, we very much would appreciate a like on this video, for subscribing to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, for trying us out, becoming a member for as little as $2.99 per month. And then also, of course, if you're interested in the All-22 and C2C Winning Edge tiers, where you can get access to these team profiles, returning production database, our stat projections, our week 0 projections are out. We'd love if you'd be interested in that as well. So hope everyone has a great rest of the week. We will be back on Friday to preview week 0, the first college football games of the season. Until then, I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com, and take care.